The cafe was packed that Tuesday evening. People sat shoulder to shoulder, sipping coffee and chatting quietly while waiting for the next performer. It was one of those cozy places in Vienna where artists came to share their work, where the smell of fresh espresso mixed with the sound of acoustic guitars and poetry readings. Nobody expected what was about to happen. Around 9:30, the room suddenly went quiet. A woman had entered through the side door. She wore all black, simple clothes that wouldn't stand out in any crowd. But her face, that was different. She wore a mask. An elegant Venetian-style mask with silver patterns that caught the dim cafe lights. It covered everything except her eyes and lips. People whispered to each other. Some pulled out their phones. Others just stared, curious about who this mysterious person might be. She walked straight to the piano in the corner, her steps quiet but confident. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't wave to the crowd or make small talk with the host. She simply sat down on the worn piano bench, adjusted her position slightly, and placed her hands over the keys. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost shy. They floated through the air like a question being asked. But within seconds, the music grew stronger, more complex. Her fingers moved across the keys with incredible speed and precision, creating melodies that seemed to tell a story without any words. The cafe had gone completely silent. Even the barista stopped making drinks. Everyone was frozen, listening. The music she played wasn't like anything they had heard before. It had the technical skill of classical training, but it felt modern, emotional, raw. There were moments when the notes climbed higher and higher, building tension that made people hold their breath. Then suddenly the melody would drop into something soft and heartbreaking, like a whisper or a memory. One man in the corner had closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. A young woman near the window had tears streaming down her face, though she didn't seem to notice. An elderly couple held hands, swaying slightly to the rhythm. The piece lasted about 7 minutes, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. Time seemed to stop while she played. Every note mattered. Every pause between the sounds carried weight. When the final note rang out and slowly faded into silence, nobody moved for a moment. The room stayed quiet, as if breaking the silence would somehow damage what they had just experienced. Then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire cafe erupted in applause. People stood up, whistling and cheering. They wanted more. They wanted to know who she was, what the piece was called, where they could hear her again. The masked woman stood up from the piano bench. She gave a small bow, graceful and humble, but she didn't speak. She didn't remove her mask. She didn't answer any of the questions being shouted at her. "What's your name?" someone called out. "Where can we find your music?" another person asked. "Will you play again next week?" She simply smiled, a mysterious smile that only added to the intrigue, and walked toward the door. A few people tried to follow her, hoping to catch her outside and learn more, but by the time they reached the street, she had vanished into the night, disappearing into the flow of people and shadows. The cafe buzzed with conversation for hours after she left. Everyone had an opinion, a theory, a feeling about what they had just witnessed. "Maybe she's a famous pianist hiding from the spotlight," suggested a university student, scrolling through his phone trying to identify the music. "Or maybe she has stage fright and the mask helps her perform," offered a woman who taught music at a local school. "Could be a marketing thing," said a skeptical businessman, "building mystery to launch an album or something." But most people didn't care about the why. They just knew they had experienced something special, something that moved them in ways they couldn't quite explain. By the next morning, videos of the performance had started appearing online. Someone had recorded the entire thing on their phone. The quality wasn't perfect, the angle was shaky, but the music came through clear and powerful. The video was titled "Mysterious Masked Pianist in Vienna Cafe." Within days, it had thousands of views. People from all over the city started commenting, sharing their own theories and feelings about the performance. "I was there that night," one comment read. "I've been going to that cafe for 5 years and I've never seen anything like this." She played like the piano was an extension of her soul. Another person wrote, "I don't know who she is, but this music made me cry." Real tears. "When was the last time a stranger's art did that to you?" The cafe owner was thrilled, of course. His small venue had suddenly become famous. Journalists called asking about the masked woman. Music bloggers wanted to know if she would return. Regular customers kept coming back hoping to catch another performance, but nobody knew if she would ever show up again. She hadn't left contact information. She hadn't taken any payment for the performance. She had simply appeared, shared her gift, and disappeared. A week passed with no sign of her. Then 2 weeks. People started to wonder if it had been a one-time thing, a beautiful moment that would never be repeated. Then, on a Thursday night at a different venue across town, she appeared again. This time it was a small jazz club. The crowd was different, more late-night party types mixed with serious music fans, but the reaction was exactly the same. The moment she sat at the piano, the energy in the room shifted. When she played, people stopped everything to listen. She performed a completely different piece this time. This one had hints of jazz mixed with classical structure, improvisation blending with careful composition. It was playful in some moments, deeply emotional in others. Once again, she left without saying a word, without revealing her identity. More videos appeared online. The views multiplied. Music forums started dedicated threads trying to analyze her technique, identify her influences, figure out who she might be. By the end of her third appearance, this time at a bookstore that hosted live music on weekends, the masked pianist had become a phenomenon. Local news stations ran stories about her, but she remained silent, anonymous, unknowable. Just a woman in a mask, sitting at various pianos around Vienna, creating music that spoke directly to people's hearts. She never played in the same place twice in a row. She never announced where she would appear next. What nobody realized yet was that behind that elegant mask was a story far more powerful than anyone could have guessed. A story about fear and courage, about loss and healing, about finding your voice when the world makes you feel like you should stay silent. The masked woman herself never read the comments or watched the videos. She didn't seek attention or validation. After each performance, she would walk home alone through the quiet streets, her mask carefully tucked away in her bag. Playing piano in public again had been terrifying at first. Her hands had shaken before that first performance at the cafe. She had almost turned around and left 3 times before finally walking through that door. But once her fingers touched those keys, something magical happened. The fear melted away. She had been practicing alone for almost 3 years. The music had been her therapy, her way of processing everything she had been through. But music, real music, was meant to be shared. So she had made a decision. She would play again, but on her own terms. The mask gave her the shield she needed, the protection that allowed her to be vulnerable. Behind it, she could pour out every emotion without fear of judgment. Behind it, she was just a musician, nothing more, nothing less. Each venue she chose carefully. She avoided big concert halls and formal stages. Instead, she sought out intimate spaces where music felt personal and honest. She knew the mystery wouldn't last forever. But for now, this was exactly what she needed. A chance to rebuild her confidence one performance at a time. The masked pianist had found her voice again. And Vienna was listening. The videos kept coming. Every week, sometimes twice a week, new footage appeared online. Different venues, different crowds, but always the same mysterious figure in black with that silver-patterned mask. By the 4th week, she had become more than just a local curiosity. She was a viral sensation. A popular music channel with millions of subscribers featured her in their weekly roundup. "Who is Vienna's masked pianist?" the host asked, showing clips from various performances. Nobody knows, but everyone's talking about her. The comment sections exploded with theories. Thousands of people from around the world weighed in with their guesses and opinions. She's definitely professionally trained. Listen to that technique. Maybe she's recovering from an accident and isn't ready to show her face yet. Could be social anxiety. The mask helps her perform. Plot twist, it's a different person each time wearing the same mask. That last theory made her laugh when she saw it. If only they knew it was just one woman, sitting in her small apartment reading these comments on her old laptop while drinking chamomile tea. She had started keeping a journal about the performances. Not for publication or anything like that, just for herself. A way to process what was happening, how it felt, what it meant. "Performance number 7, she wrote one night. A small gallery opening. Maybe 50 people. They were there for the art on the walls, but they stayed for the music. A man told me afterward that he forgot about his divorce papers for the first time in weeks. Just for those few minutes while I played. That's why I do this." The gallery owner had been hesitant at first when she showed up unannounced. but she had learned that if she arrived early and simply sat at the piano, people usually let her play. Something about her quiet confidence, the way she carried herself, made them trust her. She had developed a pattern now. She would scout locations during the day, checking out places that had pianos and hosted live events, small theaters, community centers, hotel lobbies during evening jazz sessions, bookstores, wine bars, anywhere that felt right. Then she would show up, mask in place, and wait for the right moment. Usually that moment came naturally. A break between acts or right when the evening was winding down and people were starting to leave. She would sit, play one piece, and disappear. One particular performance stood out, though. It was at a nursing home. She hadn't planned it. She had been walking past the building one evening when she heard an out-of-tune piano being played inside. The sound drew her closer. Through the window, she could see elderly residents sitting in a common room, some in wheelchairs, others on couches. A staff member was attempting to play old songs, but struggling with the keys. Without thinking too much about it, she went inside. The nurse at the reception desk looked surprised but didn't stop her as she walked toward the common room. She approached the staff member at the piano gently, gesturing to ask if she could play. The young woman looked relieved and stepped aside immediately. The residents grew quiet as the masked woman sat down. Some looked confused. Others seemed curious. One elderly man called out, "Are you here for the Halloween party?" "That's not until next month." A few people chuckled. She smiled behind her mask and began to play. She chose older melodies this time, classics from the 40s and 50s, songs these people would recognize from their youth. But she added her own style to them, her own interpretation that made them feel both familiar and fresh. Something beautiful happened. People who had been staring blankly at walls suddenly looked up. A woman in a wheelchair started humming along. Two residents held hands and swayed gently. One man had tears streaming down his face, lost in memories the music had unlocked. She played for 30 minutes that evening, longer than she usually performed. When she finished, the room erupted in applause and cheers. Several residents wanted to talk to her, to thank her, to ask where she learned to play like that. But as always, she simply smiled, bowed, and left quietly. The nursing home staff posted about it on their social media page. "The masked pianist visited us tonight. Our residents haven't been this alive in months. If you're reading this, mysterious musician, please come back." That post got shared thousands of times. It added a new dimension to her story. She wasn't just performing for hipsters and music fans in trendy venues. She was bringing music to people who really needed it, who had been forgotten by the world in many ways. More care facilities reached out through social media, inviting her to come play. She visited 3 more over the following weeks, always unannounced, always on her own terms. But with the growing attention came growing pressure. Music journalists wanted interviews. Concert promoters wanted to book her for paying gigs. A record label executive somehow got a message to one of the venues, offering a contract sight unseen. "We don't even need to know who she is," the message said. "The mystery is the brand." She ignored all of it. This wasn't about money or fame or building a career. This was about something more personal, more meaningful. The moment she signed contracts or did interviews or turned this into a business, it would lose its magic. It would become just another job, another performance obligation, another thing that demanded pieces of her soul. There was also a darker side to the attention. Some people online had become obsessed with unmasking her, not in a playful, curious way, but in an invasive, aggressive way. Amateur detectives analyzed her height, her build, her hands in the videos. They tried to match her to professional pianists in the Vienna area. Some even showed up at venues with cameras trying to follow her when she left. One night, after a performance at a small theater, a group of young men tried to corner her at the exit. "Just show us your face," one demanded, phone camera pointed at her. "You owe us that much." She didn't owe anyone anything. She pushed past them and lost them in the crowded streets, but her hands shook the entire walk home. That incident scared her. She took a break for 2 weeks, didn't perform anywhere. She needed time to think about whether this was still worth it, whether the good outweighed the bad. During those 2 weeks, the online speculation intensified. Where had she gone? Had she quit? Was she okay? Some people expressed genuine concern. Others made jokes about the mystery being over. She spent the time practicing in her apartment, working on new pieces, thinking about what music meant to her. She looked at the journal entries from her recent performances. All those moments of connection, of bringing joy or comfort or beauty to strangers. The elderly man crying at the nursing home. The divorced man forgetting his pain. The young woman who had told her, through a venue's social media, that hearing her play had inspired her to start piano lessons again after quitting 10 years ago. Those moments mattered. They were real. They were worth protecting, so she made a decision. She would continue performing, but she would be more careful. She would vary her schedule more unpredictably. She would choose smaller, more intimate venues where security wasn't an issue, and she would trust her instincts about when to stay and when to leave. On a quiet Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after her last performance, she appeared at a tiny coffee shop in a neighborhood most tourists never visited. Only about 15 people were there. She played a new composition, something she had written during her break. It was darker than her previous pieces, more complex, with hints of struggle and determination woven through the melody. When she finished, the small crowd sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then one person started clapping slowly and others joined in. A university student approached her carefully. "That was incredible," she said softly. "We were worried you had stopped playing. I'm glad you're back." Behind her mask, the pianist smiled. "I'm glad too," she whispered. It was only the second time she had spoken during a performance. She wasn't going anywhere. The music was too important. Her voice, even hidden behind a mask, was finally being heard, and that was worth everything. 3 months had passed since that first performance at the cafe. The masked pianist had become part of Vienna's identity, like the coffee houses and the classical concert halls. People talked about her the way they talked about urban legends, half believing, half wondering if she was even real. But she was very real. And she was tired, not tired of performing. Never that, but tired of always looking over her shoulder, tired of planning escape routes from every venue, tired of the weight of the secret she carried. Some nights, she would sit at her apartment window and wonder what would happen if she just took off the mask during a performance. Would people gasp? Would they be disappointed? Would they finally see her as she really was? The thought terrified her more than anything else. She had started seeing a therapist. Not to talk about the performances specifically, but about everything. About 3 years ago. About the fire. About the scars that covered the right side of her face and neck. "Why does the mask feel necessary?" her therapist asked during one session. "Because when people see my face, that's all they see. But behind the mask, I'm just a musician." The performances continued, but they were changing. She was changing. She had started playing more original compositions, pieces that told her story without words. One was full of light and quick movements, representing life before the accident. Another was darker and slower, with sudden jarring moments that felt like pain. And there was a new piece she was working on called Becoming. It was about transformation, about the space between who you were and who you're learning to be. One evening, she received an unexpected invitation. A children's hospital had reached out through one of the venues she had played at. They had a young patient, a 10-year-old girl who had been burned in a car accident. She was refusing to let anyone see her face, refusing treatment for depression, barely speaking to the nurses. "She's seen your videos," the message explained. "She asks to watch them every day. She says you're the only one who understands. Would you consider visiting her?" The pianist stared at that message for hours. This felt different from performing at nursing homes or coffee shops. This felt personal in a way that scared her. But she couldn't say no. 2 days later, she arrived at the hospital. The staff had arranged for her to visit during evening hours when the corridors were quieter. They led her to a private room where the young girl sat in bed, bandages covering part of her face, her eyes fixed on the window. The girl turned when she heard someone enter. When she saw the mask, her eyes went wide. "You're real," she whispered. "You're actually real." The masked woman nodded and sat in the chair next to the bed. She didn't say anything at first. She just reached into her bag and pulled out a small tablet. On it, she had loaded recordings of her performances. "Want to watch together?" she asked softly. The girl nodded eagerly. They sat in comfortable silence, watching video after video. During the third one, the girl started crying. Not sad crying, but the kind of tears that come when you feel understood for the first time in forever. "Why do you wear it?" the girl finally asked. "The mask?" The woman was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared people will see my scars and forget to see me." You have scars too? I do. The girl processed this information. Do they hurt? Sometimes. Not the way they used to. But they remind me of things I wish I could forget. Me too, the girl said in a small voice. They talked for an hour. Really talked. About fear and pain and feeling different. About missing the person you used to be. About not recognizing yourself in the mirror anymore. Before she left, the masked woman did something she had never done before. She asked the hospital staff if there was a piano anywhere in the building. They led her to a small chapel on the first floor. She asked the girl if she wanted to come listen. The nurses wheeled her down in her bed, along with 3 other young patients who had heard there was going to be music. In that quiet chapel, with only these few children and a couple of nurses watching, she played Becoming for the first time. The piece she had been working on, the one about transformation. It started heavy and difficult, like pushing through something hard. But slowly, note by note, it grew lighter. Not happy exactly, but hopeful. Like sunrise after a long night. When she finished, the burned girl was crying again. That's exactly how it feels, she said. Like you're becoming someone new and you don't know who yet. The masked woman knelt beside the girl's bed. And then she did something she hadn't planned. Something that surprised even herself. She slowly lifted her mask. Just enough for the girl to see. The scars were visible, red and textured, covering the right side of her face from her cheekbone to her neck. The girl stared, not in horror, but in recognition, in understanding. You're beautiful, the girl said simply. The woman felt something crack open inside her chest. She pulled the mask back down quickly, but the moment had happened. She had let someone see her. And the world hadn't ended. That night marked a shift. She couldn't explain it exactly, but something fundamental had changed. Over the next few weeks, her performances became more emotional, more raw. She played like someone who was fighting through something, working towards something. The audiences noticed. Comments online talked about how her recent pieces felt different, more vulnerable, more powerful. It's like she's saying goodbye to something, one person wrote. They weren't entirely wrong. She had started thinking seriously about removing the mask. Not yet, not immediately. But eventually, the conversation with that young girl had planted a seed. If she could show her face to a child who was struggling with the same fears, maybe she could show it to the world, but she wanted it to be on her terms, in her time, in the right way. She decided she would plan one more series of performances. 5 venues, 5 pieces that told her complete story. The final performance would be somewhere meaningful, somewhere that mattered. She spent weeks composing the music, working through the narrative arc. Each piece represented a different chapter. The accident, the isolation, the fear, the slow rebuilding, and finally the emergence. She didn't know if she would actually remove the mask during that final performance, but she wanted to be ready if the moment felt right. Word spread online that the masked pianist seemed to be building towards something. Her performances had taken on a deliberate sequential quality. People started speculating that she might be preparing for a grand finale. Concert halls reached out again, offering large venues and large payments. She declined them all. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about truth. She chose her 5 venues carefully. The cafe where it all started. The nursing home where she had seen the power of music to reach people others had forgotten. The children's hospital chapel. A small theater that supported struggling artists. And finally a venue she hadn't decided on yet. That one had to be perfect. The first 4 performances went beautifully. Each one was packed with people who had followed her journey from the beginning. Each piece of music revealed a little more of her story, though only she knew what the notes really meant. After the 4th performance at the theater, an older woman approached her. The woman had tears in her eyes. "I don't know who you are," she said, "and I don't need to know. But thank you. My daughter died 2 years ago. She was a pianist. Listening to you play, it's like hearing her voice again. You've given me a gift I can't repay." The masked woman hugged her. "You just did," she whispered. As she walked home that night, she realized something. The mask had never been about hiding from people. It had been about hiding from herself, from accepting what had happened, from moving forward. But she was ready now. Almost ready. One more performance. One more chance to decide who she wanted to be. The mystery was building toward its conclusion, and this time she was ready to let it end. The news spread quickly. The masked pianist was planning a final performance. She hadn't announced it officially, but people who had been following her journey sensed it. The way she played had changed. There was a finality to her recent pieces, like someone preparing to say goodbye. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Would she finally reveal her identity? Was she leaving Vienna? Was this really the end? She read these comments late at night, sitting in her apartment with a cup of tea cooling in her hands. They were so close to the truth, yet so far from understanding what this was really about. The fifth venue had chosen itself in an unexpected way. She had received a letter, an actual handwritten letter slipped under her apartment door. Someone had figured out where she lived. The thought should have scared her, but the letter itself was so gentle, so kind that she couldn't feel afraid. It was from the owner of a small community center in a working-class neighborhood. The center offered free music lessons to children whose families couldn't afford them. They had an old piano that desperately needed tuning, a small stage that had seen better days, and a community that had supported each other through hard times. "We've watched your journey," the letter said. "Your music has reminded our neighborhood that beauty can exist anywhere, even in difficult circumstances. If you're looking for a place for your final performance, we would be honored. No cameras if you don't want them, no press. Just people who understand what it means to keep going when things are hard." She visited the center the next day. It was perfect. Small, intimate, real. The kind of place where music mattered not because it was trendy or viral, but because it was necessary. She told them yes. The performance was scheduled for a Friday evening, 3 weeks away. She didn't announce it publicly, but word spread anyway through whispers and social media hints. The community center could only hold about 80 people, and within days hundreds had expressed interest in attending. The center's director made a decision. They would allow people to attend, but there would be rules. No phones, no cameras, no recording devices of any kind. This moment would exist only in memory, not on the internet. Some people complained online about the restrictions. They wanted to capture it, share it, make it go viral one last time, but others understood. This wasn't about content. This was about a real human moment. The 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and doubt. She practiced the final piece every single day. She called it Unmasked in her mind, though she hadn't told anyone that title. The music began heavy and concealed, layers upon layers of complexity hiding the simple melody underneath. Slowly, piece by piece, those layers fell away. The music became clearer, more exposed, more vulnerable. By the end, it was just a simple, honest melody. Beautiful not because it was complex, but because it was true. She still hadn't decided if she would actually remove the mask. Some days she was certain she would. Other days the fear came rushing back, and she convinced herself that keeping it on was fine, that the music alone could tell the story. Her therapist asked her a question during their final session before the performance. "What are you really afraid of?" She thought about it. "I'm afraid that without the mystery, I'll just be ordinary. That people will see my scars and feel sorry for me instead of respecting the music. That I'll become a sob story instead of an artist. And what if you're already extraordinary, mask or no mask? What if the scars are just part of your story, not the whole story?" She didn't answer, but the question stayed with her. The day of the performance arrived. She woke up early, unable to sleep. She spent the morning walking through Vienna, visiting the places where she had performed over these past months. The cafe where it all started. The nursing home. The bookstore. Each location held memories of connection, of music bridging the gap between her and strangers. She thought about the burned girl at the hospital, who had been discharged a week earlier. The girl's mother had sent her a message. "She's doing better. She's letting the doctors treat her face now. She says if the masked pianist can be brave, so can she. Thank you for showing her that scars don't define us." That message had made her cry for an hour. Evening came. She arrived at the community center an hour before the performance. The director showed her the space. They had cleaned it thoroughly, arranged chairs in neat rows, put flowers on the stage. The old piano had been tuned, its worn keys polished. "We're honored you chose us," the director said. "Whatever happens tonight, whatever you decide, we're grateful." People began arriving. She watched from a small room backstage as the seats filled. She recognized some faces from previous performances. Others were neighbors from the community, people who had never seen her play but had heard the stories. The burned girl was there, sitting in the front row with her mother. When the girl saw the pianist peeking out from backstage, she waved enthusiastically. The woman waved back, feeling her heart swell. At exactly 7 o'clock, the lights dimmed. The room fell silent. She walked onto the stage wearing her mask as always, dressed in simple black. The applause was warm but brief. Everyone seemed to sense that this moment required reverence, not celebration. She sat at the piano, placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and then she began to play unmasked. The music filled the small room, wrapping around everyone there like a blanket. It was everything she had learned about composition, about emotion, about storytelling without words. It was her fear and her hope, her past and her future, all woven into notes that climbed and fell and resolved and asked questions and found answers. People in the audience closed their eyes. Some swayed gently. Some held hands with the person next to them. Some cried quietly, moved by something they couldn't name. As the piece progressed, she felt something shift inside herself. The music was doing what it always did, speaking louder than words ever could. But this time she realized that the mask wasn't protecting her anymore. It was limiting her. It was keeping her from the full connection she craved, the complete honesty that true art required. The music began its final movement, the section where all the layers fell away and only the simple melody remained. Her hands continued playing, but her mind made a decision. This was the moment. As the melody grew softer and more exposed, she did something she had never done before. She played with one hand while slowly reaching up with the other to the edge of her mask. The audience noticed. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. She continued playing the simple melody with her left hand, while her right hand carefully lifted the mask away from her face. For a moment, she kept her eyes on the keys, not looking at the audience. The scars were visible now, clear under the stage lights. Red and textured, they covered the right side of her face from her eye to her jawline, extending down her neck. The final notes of the piece hung in the air. Then silence. She lifted her eyes to look at the audience, her face fully visible for the first time. No mask, no hiding. Just her, exactly as she was. She saw the burned girl in the front row. The child was crying but smiling so wide. She whispered something to her mother, then started clapping. Then everyone else joined in. The applause wasn't about pity or shock. It was about recognition, about witnessing courage, about understanding that true beauty has nothing to do with perfect skin or unmarked faces. It's about authenticity, vulnerability, the willingness to be seen. She stood and bowed, tears streaming down both sides of her face now. The scarred side and the unmarked side, both equally hers, both equally beautiful in their own way. When the applause finally died down, she spoke. Her voice was soft but clear, and in the small room everyone could hear. "My name is Elena," she said, "and this is who I am." The morning after the performance, Elena woke up feeling different, lighter somehow, like she had been carrying something heavy for 3 years and had finally set it down. She made coffee and sat by her window, looking out at Vienna as the city came to life. For the first time in months, she didn't check social media. She didn't look for videos or comments or reactions. She just sat quietly with her thoughts and her coffee. The performance had been everything she hoped for and nothing like she expected. When she had removed the mask, she had braced herself for gasps or whispers or that particular silence that comes from discomfort. Instead, she had received understanding, acceptance, something that felt like love from a room full of strangers who had become witnesses to her healing. After the applause had faded the night before, people had lined up to speak with her, not to ask invasive questions or take selfies, but to share their own stories. A woman who had survived cancer and lost her hair, a man with a prosthetic leg, a teenager with a birthmark covering half his face, a mother whose daughter had a visible disability. Each person thanked her for being brave enough to be visible, for showing them that hiding wasn't the only option. The burned girl had hugged her tightly before leaving. "You're my hero," she had whispered. Elena had hugged her back, both of them crying, both of them healing. Now, sitting in her apartment in the morning light, Elena realized something. The mask had never been the enemy. It had been a tool she needed at the time, a bridge between her trauma and her healing. But she didn't need it anymore. Her phone buzzed. Messages were flooding in, but not the kind she expected. They weren't from journalists demanding interviews or promoters offering deals. They were from music teachers, therapists, hospital administrators, support group leaders. One message stood out. It was from a woman who ran a nonprofit that worked with burn survivors. Your story is exactly what our community needs to hear. Would you consider speaking at our annual conference? Not as the mysterious pianist, but as Elena, as yourself. She stared at that message for a long time. 6 months ago, the thought would have terrified her. Even 2 months ago, she would have said no immediately. But now, something had shifted. She typed back, "I'd be honored." Over the next few weeks, Elena's life transformed in ways she hadn't anticipated. The story spread differently than the mystery had. This wasn't about viral videos or internet fame. This was about genuine human connection. A local newspaper wanted to do a feature story about trauma and healing and finding your voice again. She agreed to the interview, her first one ever. The article ran the following Sunday. It was honest and beautiful, focusing not on the spectacle of the mask but on the journey of a woman learning to accept herself again. People reached out from all over the world. Burn survivors, accident victims, people with visible differences who had spent years hiding. They thanked her for showing them another path. Elena started a small blog where she could share her thoughts and music. She posted recordings of her compositions and created a space where others could share their stories too. She continued performing, but differently now. No more mysterious appearances and quick escapes. She scheduled performances at community centers, hospitals, and care facilities. She played at fundraisers for burn survivors and music therapy programs. Sometimes she wore the mask as an artistic choice. Other times she performed with her face bare. The choice was hers now, and that made all the difference. 6 months after the unmasking, she received an invitation that surprised her. A prestigious concert hall in Vienna wanted her to perform. Not as a novelty act or a viral sensation, but as a serious musician whose work deserved recognition. She almost said no. The old fears crept back in. A big stage, a formal setting, hundreds of people analyzing not just her music but her appearance. But then she thought about the burned girl, who was now back in school and making friends. She thought about all the messages from people who said her courage had inspired theirs. She thought about the younger version of herself, hiding in her apartment, convinced she would never play for anyone again. She said yes. The concert was scheduled for a Friday evening in December, almost exactly 1 year after that first performance at the cafe. The hall held 300 people, and tickets sold out within hours. She prepared carefully, choosing 5 pieces that represented her journey. The last one was unmasked, the piece she had played when she first revealed her face. It felt right to bring it full circle. The night of the concert, she stood backstage in a beautiful dress, her hair styled, her scars visible and uncovered. She felt nervous, but it was the good kind of nervous, the kind that comes from caring about something important, not from fear of judgment. When she walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. She saw familiar faces in the audience. The burned girl and her mother, the director from the community center, her therapist, strangers who had followed her journey from the beginning. She sat at the grand piano and began to play. The music flowed through her fingers with a confidence she had built note by note, performance by performance, scar by scar. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't performing from behind a shield. She was just Elena, a woman who had survived something terrible and chose to create something beautiful from the wreckage. Between pieces, she spoke to the audience. She told them about the fire, about the 3 years of isolation, about the mask and why she needed it at the time. She told them about the burned girl who helped her see that courage was contagious, that being visible mattered more than being perfect. "Music saved my life," she said during one of these moments. "But what really healed me was learning that I didn't have to hide to be worthy. That my scars were part of my story, not the end of it. That I could be seen, truly seen, and still be enough." The final piece, Unmasked, received a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. People weren't just clapping for the music. They were celebrating the journey, the transformation, the courage it takes to be fully human in a world that often demands perfection. After the concert, Elena didn't rush away. She stayed in the lobby, talking with anyone who wanted to share a moment with her. She listened to their stories. She offered encouragement. She took pictures with people, her face visible, her smile genuine. One young woman, probably in her early 20s, approached her nervously. She had a port wine-stained birthmark across her cheek that she kept trying to hide with her hair. "I've been hiding my whole life," the woman said.
"Watching you helped me realize I'm tired of it."
"I start art school next month. I'm going to stop covering my face." Elena took both of the woman's hands. "You're going to be amazing. And your art is going to be richer because of everything you've experienced, not despite it." As Elena walked home that night, alone but not lonely, she felt a profound sense of peace. The masked pianist was gone, but Elena had emerged. Not the Elena from before the fire, but a new version. Stronger, wiser, more compassionate. She still had hard days. Days when the scars ached or when she caught her reflection and felt a pang of loss for the face she used to have. Healing wasn't linear, and acceptance was something you had to choose again and again. But she had proven something important, both to herself and to anyone who needed to hear it, that your worth isn't tied to your appearance, that art can flourish in broken places, that the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen exactly as you are. The mystery of the masked pianist had been solved, but a more important story had begun. The story of a woman who refused to let tragedy define her, who turned pain into music, who showed the world that beauty has nothing to do with perfect skin and everything to do with an honest heart. Her music had always spoken louder than any name could. But now, with her face visible and her voice clear, the message rang even truer. Elena was home. Finally, truly home in her own skin.